Hi, I'm Gary Smith. The title of my paper is Roger Milliken, South Carolina Entrepreneur and Political Kingmaker. My research questions for this paper were twofold. What was Roger Milliken's response to free trade that became such a major political issue for him? Also, what impact did Roger Milliken have on South Carolina and national politics? The significance of the research questions is extremely important because free trade is a national issue even today. Regarding Roger Milliken's impact on South Carolina and national politics, red and blue states are in a death match for the hearts and minds of the country, and Roger Milliken was very much involved in those issues. My research design for this paper was to gather documents and videos of all things Roger Milliken and Milliken and Company and distill them into a coherent narrative that addressed my two thesis questions. I made good use of the databases of Jerry Falwell Library and two South Carolina archives, the South Carolina Reading Room at the Hughes Main Library in Greenville and the Kennedy Room at the Spartanburg Public Library. Also, I visited the duck pond on the Milliken campus, which a friend who knew Roger Milliken personally had oversight. And finally, I drove by the former 6,000 square foot, 8-bedroom home of Roger and Nita Milliken in Spartanburg. Regarding the question, what was Roger Milliken's response to free trade that became such a major political issue for him? Documentation in the paper overwhelmingly shows that Roger Milliken thought free trade was an unmitigated evil, and that many trade treaties such as NAFTA and GATT and WTO and MFN and PNTR, the last two relate to China, spelled dangers for the nation. Free trade, he expressed, hollowed out American industry. Unfortunately, the Republican Party that Milliken poured money into was largely pro-free trade. The author suspects the reason for the Republican Party going all in on free trade may have been economist Milton Friedman's tremendous influence on Republican conservatives. Friedman advocated free trade. He denounced protective tariffs and reciprocal tariffs. He even advocated moving unilaterally toward free trade rather than retaliating. Between 1966 and 1983, Milton Friedman in the 1970s wrote more than 300 op-eds to espouse his belief in capitalism. In August of 1970, Friedman's Newsweek op-ed entitled "Free Trade" was in response to a bill that was being considered by Congress at that time to impose import quotas on textiles and shoes to protect the textile industry in the Carolinas from foreign competition and cheap imports. An article by Pat Buchanan, previously cited in my paper, said it best. Roger Milliken showed up at the White House in 1985 to persuade Buchanan to convince Ronald Reagan to sign a bill to slow the flood of textiles into the country. Buchanan told Roger Milliken to his face in the White House the following: "No way," I told Mr. Milliken. "I'm the biggest free trader in the building, except for the fellow down the hall," who, of course, was Ronald Reagan. Roger Milliken went away terribly disappointed. Reagan vetoed the bill, and Buchanan supervised the writing of the veto message. However, a decade later, Pat Buchanan changed his mind about free trade. In 2019, Buchanan wrote an article titled "Tariffs, the Taxes That Made America Great," which represented his 180-degree about-face from his position in the Reagan years. The best article that expresses Roger Milliken's position of free trade is one that Milliken personally wrote himself, titled "U.S. Stands Alone at the Free Trade Altar." Milliken wrote, "Questions of trade policy have moved to the top of the list of issues that preoccupy government policymakers. The stakes have never been this high before. We're talking about the wholesale transfer of economic strength to other nations and a resulting decline in American power. How much longer can we afford to watch as our policymakers permit this transfer to continue? The United States must stop sacrificing its manufacturing infrastructure on the altar of free trade, a god no other nation worships." Regarding the question, what impact did Roger Milliken have on South Carolina and national politics? And the answer to that question is that Roger Milliken was largely responsible for turning South Carolina into a two-party state, when it had previously been part of the solid Democrat South. As for national politics, Milliken was a major funder of national politicians such as Barry Goldwater, Ross Perot, Pat Buchanan, and even Ralph Nader, a solid liberal that opposed free trade. Milliken was one of the most reliable and deep-pocketed patrons of a variety of conservative causes over the second half of the 20th century. He was indispensable in providing financial support for the National Review in his early years. What would American conservatism do without the Millikens? Horrible thought, wrote magazine founder William F. Buckley Jr. Conservative activists and politicians alike went out of their way to court the Millikens. Thank you very much.